Hello Hattrickers! Welcome to this video about the basic training types in Hattrick. In this video we'll go over all the basic training types, and that means the keeper training, the defending training, playmaking training, winger training, as well as scoring training. But before we go on to those training types, let's just go over some of the basic things about training in Hattrick. Hattrick training is based on the minutes played in training giving positions for the player, and a player can train based on 19 minutes played per week. You can also have players trained with osmosis training, and it depends on the training type, but that means that all players not playing in these positions will gain some training passively. Stamina is trained each week for at least 10% of the total training intensity. If a player plays 0 minutes, a player not on the field during the week will gain 50% of the stamina training. For this video, I've created a frame of reference that consists of 17-year-old players with a solid coach trained from solid to the reference point, and that's a season's worth of training. We'll see that in a sec once we move on to keeper training. So with keepers, you can train 2 players each week. You can train a keeper in the league match and a keeper in the friendly. Keeper training is simple and it's fast. For reference, you can make it from level 7 up to level 12 in a season's worth of training. New players can then experiment with other things related to formation, experience, and generating ratings without having to worry too much about training. So the use case for most keeper training is actually introduction for new players, in my eyes. Looking at the positional chart, you can see that you only have to make sure you played 2 different keepers in the 2 weekly games. To sum it up here, the pros about keeper training is tactical flexibility, it's simple, and there is relatively good profit potential training keepers. The downsides, however, are that the trainees can be a little expensive for a newly started team, and you have fewer trainees to train. Alright, on to defending. With defending, you can train 10 players each week. You can train 5 players in the league match and 5 players in the friendly. It is the slowest training form of the basic training forms, and that's because you can train quite a lot of players. But a downside to training defending is it's quite restrictive in terms of formations, because you will have to play 5 players at the back, and again, it's quite slow. For reference, you can go from 7 to 10.2 with the season's worth of training in the reference frame here. My recommended use case would be training your own players for when they actually have to peak in a cycle. And a cycle training is basically where you train the players from the age of 17 until the end of the career. So you train them for their whole footballing life in Hattrick. You'll learn more about cycle training in other videos, because we won't actually delve further into that kind of training in this video. But if you continue to learn more about Hattrick, you will certainly hear about cycle training. Looking at the positional chart, you can see that we have all the 5 players in the back chain being trained for 100% in each of the games during the week. Again, 10 players in total. To sum it up, the pros about defending training: you have a high number of trainees, it's a core stat, and it will be very annoying for other people to play against you if you have a lot of defending skill in your team. The profit potential is quite good since you can train a lot of players. The downsides to the training is the tactical inflexibility and that it's slow. It means that training defending actually requires quite a lot of patience, more patience than you need in Hattrick in general, I'd say. So it's tough, I must say. Alright, on to playmaking, which is the most popular training of all in Hattrick. And the reason why is because playmaking is what you convert into midfield rating. And an old saying is midfield is king in Hattrick, and it still goes. Alright, on to the numbers here. You can train 10 players each week with playmaking training. 6 in the inner midfield positions and 4 in the winger slots, which gives 50% training. It's mid-paced training, and you are a little restricted when it comes to formations as well, because you'll have to play 5 players in the midfield. It doesn't feel quite as restrictive as defending, because you can then move back and forth. Do you want 2 players in defense, 3 up front, or the other way around? So it doesn't feel as restrictive, even though basically the numbers mean the same. For reference, you can go from 7 to 10.6 in skill during a season's worth of training playmaking. The use case here would be to train own peak players for a cycle, or perhaps some skill trading. Wouldn't recommend playmaking training for longer term profit training, simply because of the high supply of playmakers in general. Looking at the positional chart, you can see the 3 inner midfielders gaining 100% training slots and the wingers getting 50% of that. To sum up playmaking, you have a good amount of trainees. You do train for some competitiveness, which comes on along the way as your players get better, and there's profit potential, especially if you delve into skill trading. It also leaves some room for tinkering because you have these 50% slots, which are good for money making, but they can be harder to use effectively because, well, you only get 50% training. The downsides are, at least for long-term profit training, that the supply is quite high. There's a lot of people training playmaking, so you have to make a player that stands out in order to gain more profit from your training. If you train for competitiveness with playmaking, you may feel an initial slump in that competitiveness. If you start out with young, talented players, you may not get much midfield rating initially, but that will increase over time. But it may feel a little tough to begin with. Moving on to the wingers. The least popular training type of the basic training. You can train 8 players each week. You can train 4 wingers in 100% slots and 4 wingers in the 50% slots. That's the wingbacks. It's quite fast paced. You can go from solid to brilliant 11.7 in just a season. My recommended use case would be longer term profit training with low maintenance, especially for the 100% slots. But this also leaves a little room for tinkering and perhaps a few skill traits. Looking at the positional chart, you see the wing positions marked out for 100% and the wingbacks marked for 50%. To sum it up, pros: it's fast training, there's a good profit potential along with the 100% trainees. It leaves room for tinkering and it generates a lot of attacking rating that you can possibly score on. The downsides are that you have fewer trainees and sometimes you will have a hard time actually getting the chances because you get the attack ratings, but you may not get as much midfield rating in order to having the chances awarded. You need to have the chances before you can score on them with your attack rating. The final of the basic training types is scoring. With scoring training, you can train 6 players each week, 3 forwards in the league game and 3 forwards in the friendly match. It's mid-paced, and for reference, you can go from 7 to 10.5 over a course of a season. My use case here would be longer term profit training with low maintenance because you don't have to worry about tinkering with 50% slots. As you see in the positional chart here, you just have 3 forwards for 100% each game. To sum it up, it's simple, you have a good profit potential, and there's low maintenance involved in scoring training. The downsides are that you have fewer trainees, and it can be hard to turn your attack ratings into competitiveness, just like the winger training. As a final thing, I want to share a tip about getting some extra training because you can actually train beyond the 90 plus 90 minutes. And that is if you get extra time in your friendlies with cup rules. Alright, so most people do this by playing 5-5-0 and they play against an opposition they know already. So both teams will try to generate ratings that gets the teams into extra time because you draw 0-0. In most scenarios, this is achieved by playing 5-5-0 pressing and then having your worst possible set pieces players employed in those situations. What you then do is that after 90 minutes has gone, you either substitute extra trainees onto the field or you swap around by having players swap positions. You could also upgrade the wingback's training share from 50% all up to 66% if you just swap your wing and your wingback at 90 minutes. Also pay attention to the fact that a player will always get the best minutes. So if a player played more minutes in the winger slot than in the wingback slot, it will try to allocate all the winger minutes first and then supplement with the time spent in the wingback slot. That also means that a player playing 90 minutes at the wingback and 90 minutes in the next match as a winger will get the 100% share as a winger, and the 90 minutes played on the wingback position, for instance, will be discarded. Good to know. Use some extra training in order to gain a little extra training and get that competitive edge over your opponents. What's your favorite type of training? Please let me know in the comments and consider subscribing to the channel if you liked this video. Good luck with your training in Hattrick. I'll see you in game.